Good afternoon. It's a joint hearing of Senate Finance and House Ways and Means to hear updates on school budgets for the next fiscal year. And I believe this is our first time having Sean from the Agency of Education join us in testimony. Really glad to see you, Sean. Thank you.
Happy to be here.
And so would love to hear from you how budgets are coming in around the state.
Okay, thanks. So I'm Sean Kuzno, the interim CFO at the Agency of Education. And so I shared, I think, a little one-pager that was used in the past for these committee meetings. So we did two collections so far. One for the December 1 letter. You know, we collected the percent change that the budgets, the ed spending was doing versus the prior year. And then in January, we recollected that to get a sense of an updated figure to see how budgets were coming in. And that's what I'm showing in the table at the top. We've got the long-term weighted ADM on the left showing we have 105 budgets that submitted information in either the December 1 collection or the one we did in January. So it accounts for most of the long-term weighted ADM, and then we're estimating 17 budgets for the 11,449.
Dawn, are you interested in sharing your screen, or would you like our committee assistant to share her screen?
That way anyone watching at home can see what we're talking about.
Sure. Let me set my screen up so we can do that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's helpful.
Okay. Can you see it okay?
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was talking about these numbers over here, and then how that, you know, for the 105 districts that submitted something, that accounts for 1.8 billion of the ed spending, and then we're estimating a small portion, 162 million. And going through the numbers, we've got 92% reporting for the weighted pupils, the long-term weighted pupils. Like I said, 105 districts submitted, either in the January 1 collection or the one we did in, or sorry, December 1 collection or the one we did in January. For the 17 that didn't submit anything in either collections, we're estimating a 6.41 increase in ed spending for them. That makes an overall increase of 5.9% or 110.9 million in the ed spending line from FY25 to 26. And currently our ed spending line item, which includes the big ed spending grant and then the CTE not enrolled in the driver's ed allocation, we're looking at 1,992,471,049. And currently in our that line in our budget request is a bit higher, the 1,997,951. So in short, you know, the budgets are coming in a little less than what we requested in our budget.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify the 17 budgets with the 6.41, that's an imputed number?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
It takes the average and I bumped it up 1% as a little cushion.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Right back to you.
Okay. Let's see. So we really have, of the 105 districts reporting, only 9 of them have kind of the older data from December 1. And then we got 96 submissions in the January collection. And my final paragraph there, I think I already talked about that. The 6.41% increase is what we're estimating until we get their numbers. And it represents a small portion of the ed spending overall, just 8.2%. And looking ahead, so we are already collecting our more detailed preliminary budget collection, and our due date for that is in a couple days, February 15th. So anyone with a board approved budget should submit something by the 15th. And I think the next time we talk, I may be using some of that data for this projection. And I'm happy to take any questions. Or if you want other information in the future, happy to take notes on what you're looking for
It sounds
from us.
like the numbers are coming in about where the December 1st letter was. Is that the norm?
I think, yeah, I don't have a lot of history here. So I wouldn't be able to tell you. Julia may have a little more information.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's just been some discussion. I know when we talked to one school board, they were coming in with a reduced budget. And 2 weeks later, they came in at 5.6. The
Okay.
governor has announced that he's going to buy that down. And just wondering about the impact on that. We met with another local school this morning, and they said that when we announce we're buying something down, then they don't know when they get a positive school vote, if it's positive because they approve of the 5.9% increase, or if they're approving it because they know they're not going to pay it. And
Right.
I was just wondering if we normally, how close we normally come in to the December 1st prediction. So
Yeah.
if there's any, if you can see any history in that, just let us know.
Okay.
Not-
I am hearing for the folks who submitted the prelim budget early, they are coming in line with these projections. So I think that's some good news. So they're keeping with what they were estimating in January, more or less. So
Sean, how many districts and what type of districts are you seeing coming in over the excess spending threshold?
yeah, I'd have to pull up a sheet here. I can get back to you on that if you'd like. So who, what kind?
Okay, maybe next time you come in 2 weeks, we could dive into that a little bit.
Sure.
Thank you.
We do have schools coming in up against that, though.
Yes. Yeah, I believe there are a fair number of them.
Anyone on the committees have a?
Also be helpful to know if there's any commonality in the schools. Are they small rural schools? Are they big diverse schools? But is there any commonality in the schools that are coming up against the excess spending threshold?
Okay.
Representative Kimball?
Just wondering about the level of granularity, if you've got like a different level down where you can say for total personnel expenses, 2026 compared to 2025 across all schools. Do you have that kind of visibility? Because what I hear from different districts is they're reducing headcount while their other expenses are going up. I don't know if that's true, though. I might be making that up.
Okay. Normally we wouldn't at this time, but we are collecting a more detailed preliminary budget. That's the one that's due February 15th. So we should be able to go down a level and compare personnel costs, at least in the general fund or ed fund.
To my local paper, there are 15 to 20 personnel being laid off in one of the local school districts. And they're still coming in, I believe, at the 5.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we can start to look at that after the 15th.
Thanks. Any other questions for Sean?
Comment, not a question.
I never know. What would be the prompt that would make that feel less awkward?
Anyone have a comment?
Anyone have anything to add? Then it's a question.
Well, just to follow up on what Charlie just said, it will be interesting if we find that there are a lot of positions being cut, but budgets are still going up because of outside forces, how this new plan is addressing those outside forces. Thank you.
Is another term for outside forces cost drivers? Because I mean, that seems like
Exactly.
that's what's going on. Is there are cost drivers on personnel that are driving the budgets, probably first and foremost being health and healthcare
Mhm.
rates, which need to be addressed if we're gonna actually try to save money on school budgets.
We're working on it.
And I mean, to add my own comment, healthcare rates and personnel costs are very closely tied to each other.
For sure,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
The same.
But if you're still cutting staff and your rates are, then it's
Yes.
worse.
So that'll be fun, Sean, when you come back to compare sort of that second layer of granularity between a few years. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And again, we won't have position numbers, of course, just
No.
salary costs and benefits. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Any other? Thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us. Looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
Okay, sounds good. I'll stop sharing.
Thanks. Julia, would you like to join us?
Sure.
At this slightly awkward table configuration?
I've seen worse.
It's true.
She's closer than she used to. Across.
I really do feel like I'm in the middle.
And you now, people front and center.
I guess so. For the record, I'm Julia Richter with the Joint Fiscal Office. There is an education fund outlook that I was asked to prepare for the committees for my testimony today. Would you like me to go ahead and share it?
Thank you.
So it should also be posted on the committee page under my name.
And make it a little bigger.
So, chairs, would you like me to dive into it or?
Let's start at the top and work our way down.
Okay, great. So this is the first time this year going through this, so sort of to level set. As you'll recall, for the December 1 letter, we had the Education Fund Outlook and then the Emergency Board, we had the Education Fund Outlook. So over the course of the session, as data and policy decisions start to come in or be contemplated, we being JFO, update our yield modeling and come to you with an update of the Education Fund Outlook, reflecting the new data and the new policy considerations we were asked to include. So high level, before getting into all of the different columns, I want to name a couple of big picture what we're looking at here. So we have the Education Fund Outlook. This is really a reflection of the high level line items coming into the education fund, all of our revenues, as well as appropriations out of the education fund and uses. We also have the stabilization reserve included in this document and transfers to or from other reserves, surplus. So there's a lot in here. I have included at the top of the Outlook some letters, so it's easier to reference which columns we're referring to. So column A here, this should look very familiar to all of you. These are really the same lines that we've already looked at over the course of the session already and in previous years. Here in column B, we see fiscal year 25. This looks quite similar to the last Ed Fund Outlook I showed both of your committees for FY25. The only difference is that it's now been updated with the House passed BAA. So what we're reflecting here is those changes in the BAA for FY25 that were passed in the House version. Moving forward. So this is really essentially, those are minor changes to appropriations, right? So nothing really significant changing there. Moving forward to column C, this is a reflection of the December 1 letter. These are the numbers that were included in the Education Fund Outlook for the December 1 letter. So when Sean was referencing the pieces that have since been updated, we're seeing this column C is what did it look like pre these updates, right? Pre the e-board revenue forecast update, pre this budget data collection. So we see the original projection of the education payment here in line 11. Column, I'm just going to keep going. Okay. Column D, this is reflecting data updates. So there's a lot that's been included in here, most of which Sean spoke to. So included here is that education payment update. So school budgets are coming in about 4 million lower than originally forecasted in the December 1 letter, as Sean mentioned, right? A small decrease. So that's where we're seeing that change in line 11. And that's where the update has been captured. We also have included in the background of the modeling, you're not going to see much of it reflected here because this is high level, but I'll point in line F that the long-term weighted ADM has changed. And this is reflective of the final, for the December 1 letter, we didn't have the final long-term weighted average daily membership. So we've updated that in the background as well. The other piece that we've also included here is the statewide adjustment. So you'll recall last year in the yield bill, there was that statewide adjustment for the CLA. Also for the December 1 letter, the equalization study was not finalized and the statewide adjustment was not finalized. I had a very interesting conversation with a business official this morning. And so I decided for clarity purposes to include here, at least so that we can see that change, because we know that that's also playing into the yield. So that's really just to put everything in front of folks that may be helpful. So those are the updates that we have done, the underlying data updates that are done for the Ed Fund Outlook. Columns D and E then reflect one policy change or policy consideration in the modeling. Column D does not include any funds from the general fund for the purpose of buying down property tax rates. So just with the data updates and solving for uniform average bill change across all three classes. We know that's a policy choice, but I was asked to model a uniform bill change. So we see that that would be an average uniform bill change. If all of this data, which is still not final, were to hold true, we would estimate an average bill change of 5.8%. Of course, there are a number of policy decisions and data updates between now and when those decisions will be made. Moving forward to column E, the governor's recommended budget has that 77.2 million in general fund for the purpose of buying down property tax rates in 1 year. So this is modeling that $77.2 million general fund transfer. We can see that policy decision or exercise reflected here in line 8. You'll recall last year in fiscal year 25, 25 million was used to buy down property tax rates, one-time general fund. which we see here. And here we see that 77.2. So using that 77.2 one-time general fund dollars, and including all of the data updates, we see an average bill change, if it were to be solved uniformly, of 1.1%.
Julia, when you are you done with the poll?
I'm as done as is helpful.
When you're modeling the average percentage bill change, I think it's really hard for some reason to remember that's an average, and so there are bill changes that are way below and way above. How does the excess spending threshold feed into that?
Great question. So, I actually, I'm not prepared to talk to the number of districts, or I'm not prepared to talk to the characteristics of the districts in the excess spending threshold, but there are 11 in this data update, 11 school districts that are reaching and exceeding the excess spending threshold. How does that fit into the average bill change? Well, we'll recall that the way that the excess spending threshold works is essentially if a school district's education spending per long-term weighted ADM falls above that threshold, the amount that's falling above that threshold is double taxed. So that's being included in the purpose of our calculation. We're looking at the school districts, we're looking at those that are falling above the excess spending threshold, calculating their tax rate with that double taxation. And then that's flowing through, of course, to the town's school district. So all of that to say, when we're calculating the average bill change, we are looking at the average growth in property across the different classes or income. And then we're looking at the average rate change. And the way that we're calculating those averages for the purpose of the rates is they're weighted averages based off of the parcels in the towns. So it is playing in.
And sort of skewing it upwards.
And skewing it upwards, depending on the districts that are hitting the excess spending threshold, right? So if the 11 districts are really small districts with only a couple of properties in them, the impact of that excess spending threshold is not going to skew it upwards because it's not going to be a big part of that weighted average. If it were some of our largest districts, then of course it would skew it up.
Two questions really quick. 11 out of how many? Is that out of the 119 school districts? Okay. And then can you help me understand line 32? What is the transfer to 10 million that we did to the unreserved unallocated? And why are we transferring from the now 40.8 million? What is happening in line 32? Allocation of revenue section.
Yeah. So what we're doing here is you can see that, and this is where normally I have it up, I don't. I would add a plug to our, I'm gonna share my screen here for a second. On our JFO webpage, and I know you know this, and I'm saying this solely for folks watching at home. On our JFO webpage, we have the annotated guide of the Education Fund Outlook. So this is a helpful way of when thinking about interpreting the Education Fund Outlook and what is included in each one of the line items, it's reflected there. So the line numbers are not the same, but the lines themselves generally are. When talking about that line 32, is it?
Close that up a little bit.
Yes. Sharing? Oh, okay. Okay, so when looking at the line 32, so transferring to or from unreserved unallocated. This is really, and the reason I was referencing the annotated guide feel like kind of the trickiest part of interpreting the education fund outlook, because what it's doing here is it's showing us the different flow through to the different lines within the outlook. So we can see here that we have technically a revenue deficit, because when considering how much we're bringing in versus how much we're spending out, there's a difference about 38 million, but that's not actually a deficit, because we have surplus dollars in the education fund, which we see here on line 39 from the prior year of 41 million.
Thank you.
So we're taking that and then we're saying, okay, but we have a deficit, but we're using the unreserved unallocated.
Thank you.
So really, it's 77 million up top and 40 down below, 41 million down below to help subsidize.
Correct. Yeah, so the 77 million is on top of using the entire surplus for the purpose of uniformly lowering tax rates. That was assumed in the December 1 letter, because in statute, we have to assume that for the December 1st letter. Moving forward, that's a policy choice, but that's how I was asked to model it today.
And for the actual yield bill, we can change the relationship between the income-based yield and the homestead yield if we want. We can apply those unreserved to something else. Anyone? Yeah.
Sorry, I just got distracted. But if we use all of the reserves, $1 million in reserves, isn't there a requirement that we end the year with a certain amount of reserves? And would this not end the year with any reserves?
So I appreciate the question. So the 41 million that we're seeing here on line 39 is surplus. This is unreserved, unallocated.
Okay.
I think that what you're speaking to is the stabilization reserve, which you see here in lines 33 through 36.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at the additional reserve section. I didn't see the stabilization reserve above it. Okay.
So in statute, there's that reserve target of 5%. So what I've assumed here is that the stabilization reserve is fully funded.
Okay.
So this 52.1 million is sort of like 52.1 set aside, fence drawn around it for the purpose of the stabilization reserve, or actually rather it's 54.9, 52.1 is the prior year. Set aside for the 5% of prior year net appropriations.
Okay, great.
And this last year, did we dip into the reserve?
There was policy consideration last year to dip it into the stabilization reserve to buy down in 1 year. That policy decision was not made. So we did not need to refill it because it was not used to buy down rates artificially last year. Over the summer in July, the revenue forecast came in lower than was anticipated, which meant that we had to model using the reserves over the summer for the purpose of ensuring the ed fund was fully funded.
I remember at one point we were needing to use the reserve. Things are looking better. At least you're not dipping into the reserves.
Correct, we're not dipping into the reserves.
That's better.
On this topic, from my city council days, I thought I recall our reserve target was usually 3% of our operating budget, and we are at 5%. Has it always been a 5% education fund reserve?
I don't know. That's where I would want to phone a ledge council friend. I believe that in statute it says 3.5 to 5%, but the practice, at least since I started and the historical context I have is a 5% target, but I don't know if what the history is there.
Thank you.
There's a really fun new KFO presentation about reserve targets and choosing the right reserve targets that recommend for people in their free time, or maybe testimony. Anyone else? Okay.
There was one question that was asked to Sean that, I made a note on there. There was the question of how it compares to previous years, this change. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but I did want to note that it really varies year to year. For instance, we saw last year between December and now we saw that uptick in education spending. So this is different than what we saw last year.
But last year was kind of an anomaly because they were under the impression in December that they were capped if they stayed under 10%. When that changed, numbers changed. So last year was an anomaly too. So I'm just wondering how. And then the budgets came out and then things came down. So, the votes.
Starting to wonder how many years we can say that something is anomalous. before we say it's anomalous for-
They are every year, right?
Like, because we change things every year.
Well, then we're in uncharted territory right now, so. What we see up there today may not be up there tomorrow if things change elsewhere.
Can you remind us how much of education, spending on education in the state is federal funds?
I don't remember off of the top of my head, but there's a significant amount of money coming to the state through federal education dollars. The percentage, I can certainly get back to you on that. I'm just not prepared to talk about today.
Triple E. Yeah, I mean, I think it's more than.
A related question to what Chair Kornheiser just raised is, for the universal meals, I would be interested to know if that current rate is tied to any federal programs that are on the Trump chopping block. And so any information that might be regarding how that estimate could fluctuate with all the chaos that's coming out of DC would be welcome.
So I can't speak to what is or isn't on the federal administration's priority list. I'm not prepared to speak to that today.
You don't know?
I will say that just the fundamental underlying aspect of universal school meals, essentially the way that the program works is there's sort of three categories, so to speak, of families based on income. So at 130%, I believe, of the federal poverty limit level up to 180%. So your lowest income group are considered free. So there's federal reimbursement for those free meals. In that middle group, it's reduced, in which the feds kick in less, but a chunk, and the state, even pre-universal school meals, was making up that difference. And then the children from families above that level are considered paid, and the federal government kicks in a very little bit for those meals. The Universal Meals Program covers that difference between the family share, so to speak. So all of that to say, with a significant change in the amount of money coming from the federal government of those reimbursements for free, reduced, and or paid, that would create a larger gap that would need to be funded.
And I imagine that would be the very, very least of our problems. Education. I'm curious, so the buy down here brought us to a uniform 1.1%. And I don't expect you to prepare to speak to this today, but I'm curious about, like, to dive in the future, we're making all of these decisions based on an average, and that might mean that some district tax rates are going down significantly, and others are still going up significantly. And so in the future, when we have these conversations, I think it might be helpful to get a sense of the range and who is sort of, what kinds of districts are at the far ends of that range, and how sort of people are clustering towards average. Because I think we make so many decisions based on that uniform average percentage build range, and I don't know if that's necessarily the most appropriate way to be making those decisions.
Is anyone actually the average?
I mean, you, okay.
But absolutely have highs and lows, and essentially very few or no one in the middle once you average them out.
Well, they'll be wildly different just because of where they are in the appraisal. We're talking about rates.
Another little fly in the ointment.
We're gonna fix all of the appraisal challenges though. I'll start it up.
Everybody here is going to become a appraiser.
Anything else for Julia? Thank you. You'll just like the page. I think we have a break of 30 minutes until Jake Feldman joins us.